Mounting the camera to the tripod is a two-stage process. You mount the camera mount chuck, mounts to the bottom, 1/4-20 threaded hole at the bottom of the camera. There's two little knobs in the threaded piece. Thread it in. Make sure you go in several turns to be safe. Point the front of the chuck that says lens and has an arrow to the front of the camera, and then tighten it down with the large knob. You may need to tighten it down a couple of times to get it tight and facing to the front. This octagonal chuck then mounts to the tripod head. You'll see there's two tapered grooves here on this side and a chuck or a cam here with a pin. Make sure you get these two in all the way. It's easy to miss and get one and your camera is not secure. When you've got them in on both sides, press down, the lever will release and lock the camera, and then make sure that your camera's tight. And I always take the camera strap and just wrap it around the arms of the tripod just to make sure if it gets away from me, it doesn't hit the ground. These three controls the elevation, has a twist lock, panning left and right, and again a twist lock, and finally for vertical orientation or horizontal. And for accuracy, we have the bubble levels on the side and the back. Now, removing the camera is pretty much the reverse of it. Each of these tripod heads are a little different in design as they've progressed in production. This particular one is the safety design, and there's a release. Let me pull this up. A release right here that you have to push and hold, and then pull this cam, and that will lock and you can remove the camera. Again, they're all a little different, but basically the same design. This is a brief rundown on how to use the Minolta flash meter. This meter is necessary because your in-camera meters are incapable of determining correct exposure using a studio flash. So we use this to determine a starting point for your shooting. There's a number of important buttons on here. We'll cover a couple of them. The first one is the mode, which changes between ambient, which is continuous light, like fluorescence or floodlights. Cord, which means that you're plugging a sync cord in, which connects to the flash, and non-cord. In this class, we'll be using mostly the non-cord because we're using our radio slave transmitters to trigger the flash so that we don't have to wire the cameras directly to the high-powered flash and risk damaging your delicate electronics. The other controls are on the side. There's an up and down, and that changes the shutter speed or time, 125th. These numbers are implied fractions. That's 125th of a second, 180th, a 250th. Most of your cameras are incapable of syncing with the flash any faster than 125th, and it may be as low as a 90th or a 60th of a second. But you can see the up and down controls the shutter speed. The other control is the ISO button. ISO is the sensitivity of your camera's sensor chip. You need to set this to match what your camera ISO is set at, and that is actuated by holding down the ISO button and then again the up and down. That's ISO 120, 160, 200, 250, 320, etc. And again up and down. Let's set it for ISO 100, which is my standard default, and let's set our shutter speed at, in this case, the 60th of a second. Also on this meter, there are an assortment of diffusers or probes that you can use depending on your subjects and circumstances. All of these, or two of these, are used for measuring light falling on the subject, or incident probes for incident light, meaning light falling on the subject and is measured from the subject position. This dome-shaped one is good for mimicking the shape of a human face. It picks up the light coming from the sides as well as from the front, and it's a good one to use for multi-purpose. To remove them and replace a different probe, you turn the diffuser about 45 degrees counterclockwise and lift it off. This probe is a flat diffuser and is very good for determining light ratios where you want to just measure the light coming in from one angle. I can measure the key light, the fill light, background lights, whatever, but it isolates the light from each individual flash, and it's used quite a bit in the studio to control contrast. Finally, and both of these are used to measure light, again, falling on the subject. So these readings are taken from the subject position pointed towards the camera. Finally, the third probe you're likely to use is the reflected probe, and it's marked reflected, and it has a little hole in it, and this one behaves more like your camera meter in that you point it from the camera position towards the subject. So that measures the light bouncing off of the subject and reflected towards the camera. Two different ways of metering the light. There are pluses and minuses to both, and we'll discuss them at another time. Now, I'm going to use the spherical diffuser to measure the light falling on me, the subject, in this portrait lighting. And I've taken the radio transmitter off of the camera to use to fire the flash. So I'll press the flash metering button. To actuate this meter in the non-cord, we press the actuation button, and you should see the non-cord indicator flashing, indicating the meter is armed. Point the meter towards the light and fire it with my transmitter. And that gives us an exposure at 100 ISO, the 60th of a second at f/16.